All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for, first of all, I knew our Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tels Mishpach of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Roshos this year in the schools of Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan, Haba Alim Latovo Paul Pollock, the celebration of the Nisan birthdays of his wife Kathy, his granddaughter Tikva Esther, and the birth of a grandson to Ida and Jeremiah Pollock of Indianapolis, Indiana. Anonymous sponsorship in the Schos of Simchos for all of our children, and for Nisan to be the month of Geula Shlema for Klal Yisrael, and Avram Shindi Kelman in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah Brina Bas Yoshua Heschel, Zichron Librach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, should be Zocheh Meretz Hashem to see the return of our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karuf, and in Meretz Hashem the success of our holy soldiers, B'Chol Maaseh Yedehem. Well, so with that, let us begin. So we're going to be today's daf is Yud Gimel 13. We are picking up on the Mishnah on the bottom of Yud Beis Amud Beis Kiyotzebo. So again, the Mishnah says this house Kiyotzebo. This is a very interesting case. Right? An accidental murderer goes ahead and flees to the Ir Miklat. And the people of his city want to go ahead and give him cover. They want to give him cover. So what's the halacha? Yomer lahem rotzeach ani. He has to say to them, "I'm a rotzeach." So in other words, they want to give him kind of. It's just fascinating, right? So you can imagine. By the way, he's in the Ir Miklat. They want it's Yom Kippur. They want to give him Mafter Yonah. They want to give him, I don't know, Psicha for Geshem. I don't know, whatever for the Chazar. A Maltz of Rabbi Wolaski on the bris of his grandson Acharon Shal Pesach. Rabbi, what's the name? Yaakov Mordechai. Beautiful, beautiful. Wow. Yaakov Mordechai. The God of the Torah, the Chuppah, the Ma'asim Tovim. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. So again, so he's in the Ir Miklat. He's in the Ir Miklat, and again, he wants to go ahead. They want to give him a covet. They want to give him a covet. So what's the halacha? It also tells you something amazing. You say to yourself, really, they want to give him a kibbut in the Ir Miklat. First of all, we learned on. It's like time is a blur. What's today? Today's Monday. We learned on Shabbos that the Ir Miklat has to be made up of 51% of people who are not accidental murderers. Right? So there's other people to be mechabed in the town. So why do they want to give him a kibbud? So we'll say, what's the answer? The answer is because even good people do bad things, right? Just because, again, obviously, Reuven did something very significant and very serious. V'haraya, the proof to that is he's in Galus, right? He's got to stay in exile. But Lamaisa, just because he is in Galus doesn't mean that there's not Gutkeit inside of him. The people of the city see that, so they want to give him a covet. Okay, so what's the halacha? They want to give him a covet. So he has to say to them, he has to say, Rotzeachani. He says, I'm a rotzeach, meaning that, guys, I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't know if I'm deserving. I think there may be other people. Don't give me the kibbutz. So the Gemara says, Amr la'afa pikein. If they say to them, okay, we understand that you are that you are a killer b'shogeg, but still, we still want to be mechabed you. So what's the halacha? Yikabel mehen. Ultimately, he's allowed to accept the kibbutz. Very interesting. Allowed to accept the kibbutz. Shneimar v'zed devar harotzeach. And he says, because as the pasuk says, this is the matter of the rotzeach. This is the matter of the murder. So the Gemara's darshaning over here is ze divar harotzeach means dibor, like he has to go ahead and say, I am a rotzeach. After he says that, and then they still want to be mechabed him, that's fine. But it's also very interesting to note that the Rambam brings down. We mentioned this on the first day of last days on Shri Shal Pesach. Rambam brings down in Hilchos Tshuva. Now, what's the first step to Tshuva? Right, Parak Aleph Halacha Aleph Hilchos Tshuva. What's the first step of Tshuva? Right, vidui, confession. Then in the Rambam's model of Tshuva, the first thing you have to do is you have to confess. You have to articulate your sin. There's no Tshuva. There's no change unless I'm willing to actively admit what I have done wrong. It's fascinating to see that perhaps this is part of the tshuva process of this individual as well, right? What's part of his process? Part of his process is rotzeach ani. I'm a rotzeach. You gotta say it. You gotta say it. And by the way, can you imagine having to say those words? And if you notice, it doesn't say like, I'm a rotzeach. I'm a murderer. I'm a murderer. B'shogeg, right? But he has to, it's almost as if part of his tshuva process is the ability to articulate those very words. Okay, top of the Gimel, 13a. Ma'alim, so we'll say, actually, this is an interesting case. Stuart Schindler asked me this question over over Yom Tiv. Malim hayu schar levim div Rabbi Yehuda. We'll say, right, the question that's been on many of our minds from the beginning of this Masechta is who's paying for all this, right? Who's paying for all this? You have these guys who are running to these cities of refuge, right? They're going ahead. Like, what exactly is what's the model of this, right? This is before the days of Doge, right? So I guess they had the money computer, right? So you can go ahead and print anything you want, right? So who paid for this? Who paid for all of this? So the Gemara says, who says the Ruvain. Ruvain pays for this. What are you talking about? Who pays for this? Ruvain goes to Galus. Ruvain's living in one of this. Remember, there are 40. Has a total of how many? I gave it away. How many cities of refuge do we have in total? 48. Right. We have 6 that were identified. 3 by Moshe, 3 by Yoshua, and then every Levitic city becomes a city of refuge. So 48 cities. So Yehuda says, if you're a murderer b'shogeg, you run to these cities. You pay rent. You pay rent. Malim ha'yuschar. Rashi says over Malim, Ha'arim schar levim sharotzim sochrim mehem as batei adiros. Again, you go to a Levitic city, you pay rent. That's the way it works. Okay, Rabbi Meir says, Lo hayu malim sam schar. Meir says, no, you didn't have to pay rent. So the machlokes of seeing the Gemara what that's about. Okay, so that's part 2. So we'll say, so part one is if you are in the city of refuge and they want to offer you a kibbutz. They want to offer you a kibbutz, you can accept it as long as you first say, by the way, I'm a killer b'shogeg. Part 1. Part 2, do you have to pay rent? Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says yes. Rabbi Meir says no. Part 3, the chozer l'srara shahayaba. Both say different. Rabbi Meir. Listen to this. This is fascinating. Let's say Ruvain occupied a position of prominence before this event. Rashi's examples over here. Im hayanasi orosh beis av. Remember again, I was saying the tribal model. So every tribe obviously had a nasi, a tribal prince. But within each tribe, tribes had families, and they were heads of families. Let's say Ruvain had a position, or let's make it even more extreme. Ruvain was the nasi of his shevet. He was a tribal prince. He killed someone b'shogeg. He goes to the Ir Miklat. Kohen Gadol dies, and now ultimately again he comes back. He comes back to his place. So does he resume his former position of prominence? So Rabbi Meir says, yeah, he goes back to his former position. So that's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo hayachozer l'srara shahayaba. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, he does not go back to his formal position that he had before. Okay, so we'll say, so 2 major machloksim in the Mishnah over here, one about rent and one about resumption of what we'll call former stature, former offers, former position. Okay, says the Gemara. I'm Rav Kana. So Rav Kana says, machlokes b'sheish. So now we're focusing a lot more on the conversation regarding rent, right? What happens again? Is there an obligation to pay rent? So Rav Kana says like this: machlokes b'sheish. The machlokes is only by the 6 cities. Now, what are the 6 cities? 3 established by Moshe, 3 established by Yoshua. That's where there's the machlokes. Why? The Mar Savar Lachem. So we'll say the lashon of the pasuk is v'hayu lachem ha'arim lemiklat migal. Right? The cities will be for you, lachem. What does lachem mean? So this is fascinating. The Mar Savar Lachem leklita. So one says lachem means it'll afford you refuge. Umar Savar Lachem lechol tzarchechem. And one says lachem means it's yours for all of your needs. Meaning what? No rent. It's all yours. But by the other 42 cities, the Levitic cities, everyone agrees, you pay rent. Amalei Rava. So both say, so that's the first iteration of the Machlokes. That's Rav Kahana. Amalei Rava says, Ha vaday lachem l'chol tzarchechem mashma. Rava says that's not true. The word lachem absolutely means lachem l'chol tzarchechem, which means rent-free. The cities are yours, and there is absolutely no obligation to pay any kind of rent. Ella Amar Rava says, so what is Machlokes? Here we go. Machlokes barba mushtayim. So we'll say, Rava flips it. Rava says, everyone agrees in the 6 primary cities, there is no rent obligation. Because the pasuk says, lachem, the cities are yours. In other words, they are there to serve the murderer, and therefore Allah Chama said, no rent necessary. Where is the Machlokes? Barba mushtayim. The Machlokes is by the 42 Levitic cities. The Mar Savar va'aleihem titnu kihanach leklita Umar Savar Va'aleim, let me say it again. El Demar Savar Va'aleim Titnu. Now, I will say, the pasuk when it comes to the Levitic city says, Ve'esa'arim asher titnu la'avim, ashesh arim miklad, asher titnu lahem, Va'aleim titnu arba mishnayim ir. So the way the Torah phrases these 42 cities is it gives the 42 cities for the Levium, and Va'aleim titnu, and upon these cities is also conferred the status of an Ir Miklat. So the Torah itself says these 42 cities, Aleim Titnu, place upon them like the status of an Ir Miklat. So the Shaila is, what does that mean? So the Mar Savar V'Aleim Titnu Ki Hanach Leklita. So one opinion says V'Aleim Titnu means just like the 6 cities go ahead and afford protection, so too, these other 42 cities also should go ahead and afford that same level of protection. But aloha l'maisa, the 42 cities are not rent-free. They're not rent-free. The 6 are rent-free, the 42 are not rent-free. Umar savar v'aleim titnu ki hanach. Another opinion says, no. The Torah is telling us that the 42 become just like the other 6. How so? The Gemara says, ma hanach. Just like the 6, right, are rent-free. Ultimately, again, so too the other 42 are also rent-free. But with the 6, everyone agrees that for the initial 6, 3 of Moshe, 3 of Yoshua, there's absolutely no rent obligation. So fascinating about saying, how do we pass halacha l'maisa? So the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Rotzeach, Perek Ches Halacha Yud, Rotzeach Hadar Ba'are Miklat, Eino Nosein Schar Beso. That if you live in one of the Are Miklat, you do not have to pay rent. However, Vadar Bishar Are Halavim, Nosein Schar Lebalabayis. So Rabbi says, here it is. Rambam Paskins like this version of Rava. So if you seek refuge in the 6 primary cities of refuge, rent-free. You utilize one of the Levitic cities for refuge, halacha l'maisa, you have to pay rent to whoever it is that you're living by. Fascinating. Which I will say also is interesting because what comes out? I don't know. I never thought about this before. What comes out? It's another revenue stream for the Levium. I remember again, Levi doesn't have a portion of Eretz Yisrael, but ultimately again they get certain matanos. But interestingly enough, apparently there's rental income as well from the Ir Miklat. Okay, fascinating. Let's go back to the Choslas Rosh Hashanah. So that's Machlokes 1. So now we've resolved that. Machlokes 2 was whether or not what happens. Let's say again, Reuven was a Nasi, and now again Reuven kills someone Mishogeg, goes to the Ir Miklat. Kohen Gadol dies. He goes ahead. Now he comes back home. Does he resume his former position of prominence? So Machlokes in the Mishnah. Choslas Rav. So it's not on Vishav al Mishpachto ve'al achuzas avosav. So the Gemara says, now interestingly enough, this is by Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri, right? That if a person, let's say Reuven steals, Reuven can't pay off his debt. He's sold into servitude, and now halacha l'maisa again, he goes free whenever it is, after Sheish, after Yovel, depending on whatever it is. So the pasuk says, "V'shav al mishpachto ve'el achuzas avosav." He will return to his family, and literally again to the portion of his fathers. So the Gemara says, "Yashuv l'mishpachto ushav." Ve'eno shav l'mashech ziko avosav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's true. The Eved Ivri after emancipation goes back ultimately to his family. He's restored to his family, but he does not go back to any office held by his family. So an Eved Ivri return back to his people, return back to his family, but he does not resume any what we'll call familial position that was held by his mishpacha. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Actually, not yet. Dear Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says, Af hushav l'mashech ziku avosav. So the Gemara says, El achuzas avosav. Kavosav. So Rabbi Meir disagrees. Rabbi Meir says, no, that halacha l'maisa, there's 2 things being mentioned in the pasuk. The shav al mishpachto means that the Eved Ivri goes home to his family, and then ve'el achuzas avosav means he goes back and he reclaims any familial position of power. Right? Any position of power, ancestral position of power that would have been his, ultimately, again, he is able to reclaim. So Gemara says, V'chein bagola, and the same halacha applies to someone who is exiled. So again, I will say, interestingly enough, whereas our Mishnah framed this Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir as primarily occurring with the exile, with the killer b'shogeg, in fact, the Brisa says the primary Machlok is actually by Eved Ivri. That's where it comes up. Eved Ivri, upon emancipation, everyone agrees Eved Ivri goes back to his family. Does he resume his former position of prominence? So again, Rabbi Meir says yes. Rabbi Yehuda says yes. No. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Meir says yes. And then the Gemara says the same machlokas by Eved Ivri also applies by the exile. Kishu Omer Yashuv l'Rabos Esarotzeach. Because when the pasuk says Yashuv by Eved Ivri, that comes to include the killer as well. So the Gemara says, "My v'chein begola." What does it mean when it says the similar halacha applies to the exile? So the Gemara says, "Kidisanyo Yashuv harotzeach al eretz achuzaso." The pasuk says the accidental killer, will go ahead and return le'eretz achuzaso. So the Gemara says le'eretz achuzaso hushav. He goes back to his land. In other words, he doesn't have to live in exile. He goes back to his house. Ve'eno shav lemashech ziko avosav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. But he does not go back to any former position of prominence that he occupied. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says afu shav lemashech ziko avosav. Rabbi Meir says not true. He even goes back to any position of prominence formerly held by his ancestors. Gamar Shiva Mehasam, because they make a Gzer Shava of Shiva, ultimately again from Eved Ivri. So therefore, I will say we are left with this Machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and it turns out that it's a Machlokes in two places in Halacha. And Eved Ivri, who's emancipated, everyone agrees he'll go back to his family. Does he also go back to any former position of familial prominence? Rotzeach, when Kohen Gadol dies and he goes back home, does he go back to his former position of prominence? Machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. How do we paskin? So the Rambam again also in Hilchos Rotzeach. Previous was Parak Ches. This is Parak Zayin Halacha Yedal, and here it is. Afapi sheniskaperlo eino chozer l'srara shahaya ba the olam. The Rabbi say this is fascinating. Even once the Rotzeach goes free, he does not go ahead and go back to any formerly held position of familial power. The Gemara says, Ella umurad migdulaso kol yamav. He loses that position, right? So again, he was a nasi of his tribe, for example. He was the head of his family, the nasi beis av. When he comes back from Galus, he does not resume those positions. So we'll say, now why not? This is fascinating. Hoil since this terrible mistake occurred through his hand, it's not appropriate for him to kind of resume this position of power. Very interesting. Again, it seems to be almost like a little bit contradictory, because on one hand, he went to Galus, and if he went to Galus, right, the only way he's coming home is how? Death of Kohen Gadol. We saw in Shabbos' daf that, remember again, it's not Galus that's mechaber, but rather again, it's the death of the Kohen Gadol that atones, which means that Ruvain did the crime, did the time, and had his kapara. Yet the halacha still is, he can't resume his former position of prominence. What do you see from here? What you see from here is that there are certain events, there are certain things that we do in life that just forever change the trajectory of who we are and what we are. And whereas you could have kapara, you could write, Reuven has atonement. He has been atoned for the sin. It doesn't change the fact materially that what he did, he did. And I'll say this is sometimes like this difficult, little bit like dialectic of tshuva a little bit. On one hand, I believe tshuva can atone for anything, and tshuva does atone for anything, and tshuva wipes the slate clean. But the interesting part is sometimes in life, you could wipe the slate clean, but you can't go ahead and purge the act itself. The event remains. And that's something I have to live with for the rest of my life. I did something terrible. I can atone for it. I can even remove culpability from it, but I can't take back the act. That is a reality that lives in this world that cannot be undone. So from like a liability perspective, a culpability perspective, I'm done. I'm atoned for, but I can't change the fact that the act has been performed. And because of that, the Rambam says, Ruvain, you can't go back to being the Nasi. You took someone's life. right? You can't undo what you did. Again, atonement, yes. Undo the act, no. And I will say, this is so incredibly important because I think a lot of times in life, like we do things and we act in certain ways because deep down we just figure to ourselves, okay, like I'll apologize afterwards, right? Or I'll make amends afterwards, or somehow I'll fix it afterwards. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes what we do simply cannot be undone. I could have atonement, I could have forgiveness, but I can't undo the act, which is just why we have to live life. You know, I don't know, I felt like last night, like after Abdullah, you feel like a little bit of like like the way you feel after Sukkot, New Year, New Beginning. We're going into Sfira, countdown towards Matan Torah. It does feel a little bit like that, like the slate has been wiped clean. And it does feel a little bit like it's a new beginning. And as we enter into this new beginning, how important it is to enter in with a sense of mindfulness about how we act, what we do, the actions we do, the things that we say. Because at the end of the day, some things can't be undone. So we have to really be mindful about what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. Because although some things you can purge, a lot of things, once you do it, it's there and cannot be undone, and we're stuck with the residual effects of those things. Amazingly enough, Ruvain, the accidental killer, can absolutely achieve kapara, but he cannot return to a certain position of prominence because the act itself can never be taken back. Incredible. Hadron Allah, Eloi Nagon. I will say Mazel Tov. Shkoyach. Okay, next topic. These are the individuals who receive Makkos. So we'll say, so now we're going to focus a lot on lashes. So we've kind of left Gullus. We left Gullus, Baruch Hashem. We left Gullus, and now we're into Makkos. These are the people. We'll still come back to Gullus a little bit. These are the people who receive Makkos. So we'll say, essentially, we're going to show. Well, let's go through the list. Habal, right? Incest with one sister. Al achos aviv, the sister of my father. Achos imo, sister of mother. Achos ishto, sister of one's wife. Al ishes achiv, brother's wife. Val ishes achi aviv, the wife of father's sister. Va'al anida, and with woman who's anida. And I both say, kam denominator amongst all of these relationships, chiyav kares. Chiyav kares. What the Mishnah is introducing us to is that where there is a chiyav kares, you also get Makkos. You also get Makkos. Okay. Next category. Amar the Kohen Gadol. First one, Amar the Kohen Gadol. Grusha v'chalutza the Kohen Hedyot. So a Kohen Gadol marries an Almana, right? Remember again, a Kohen Gadol has two things. Number one, a Kohen Gadol can, well, not one thing. Kohen Gadol can only marry a Besula. A regular Kohen can't marry a Grusha, a divorcee, but he can marry a widow because a regular Kohen does not have an obligation to marry a Besula. But Kohen Gadol has an obligation to marry a Besula. So let's say Kohen Gadol marries an Almana, Almana the Kohen Gadol, or a Grusha v'chalutza the Kohen Hedyot, or a Grusha v'chalutza, right, for a Kohen Hedyot. Mamzeres unasina Yisrael, right, a regular Jew can't marry a mamzer or a nasin, but Yisrael and nasin or a mamzer. So we'll say, what are these examples of? Lavim. Now, interestingly enough, so this is a lav, and what you see from me is you get Makkos for the commission of a lav. So category one is I get Makkos for kares. Category two, I get Makkos for a lav. Next, Almana ugrusha chayav la mishum shnei shemos. Now, by the way, just as an aside, let's say a Kohen Gadol marries a woman who's both an Almana and the grusha. Right. So again, Rachel was married. Her first marriage ended in divorce. She got married a second time, and now she was widowed. Third time's the charm, right? So now she gets married to the Kohen Gadol the third time. Otherwise, they should be happy. It's just prohibited, right? So now he has two prohibitions now. She's a grusha and she's an almana. So almana or grusha, chayal mishum shnei shemos. If Kohen Gadol marries her, he's chayiv twice. Grusha v'chalutza. So what's interesting enough, if a regular Kohen marries a woman who's both a grusha and a chalutza, ultimately again he's only chayiv once. Now we'll see this in the Gemara, but Rashi points out over here that's because it's only explicit that he can't marry a grusha. Chalutza is learned out from a drasha. So because it's not explicit, therefore he's only chayiv one set of malchus. Okay. Next, other examples of kares bearing prohibitions that therefore generate an obligation from Makkos. For example, so someone who's tameh, who goes ahead and eats, let's say, karbanos. Or va'abal hamikdash tamei, someone comes to the base hamikdash in a state of tumah, or va'ochal chelev v'dam, or someone eats chelev, right, forbidden fats, or dam, blood, v'nosar upigol, or someone eats nosar. Remember again, nosar, carbon leftover past its permitted time. Pigol is carbon ultimately again where the coin has a negative machshava, an erroneous machshava during the avodah, or vatame. Right, there's someone who eats right. Right, tamei is just someone who eats karbanos in the state of tuma. Vashochet umala b'chutz, someone who shechs karbanos outside, offers it up outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Va'ochel chametz bepesach. Wow, absolutely incredible. I will say 7.5 year cycle. Chametz on Isru Chag. Incredible. Va'ochel chametz bepesach. Va'ochel. Or one who eats or does malacha on Yom Kippur, or one who goes ahead and makes the shemen hamishcha, the anointing oil, right? Or or one who goes ahead and makes the ketores, one who anoints themselves with anointing oil, or we'll say, so again, all of these examples, kares. Once again, examples of kares bearing prohibitions, and if you do them, you get malchus. Fine. Now we'll say now we go to regular lavin, regular prohibitions. What are examples of regular prohibitions? Somebody eats an avela, right? There's an animal that died without shchita, right? Treifa, an animal ultimately again that has some type of malady, right? Even if you shecht it, it's still not kosher. Shkatzim v'ramasim, creepy, crawly things. Achol tevel u'maiser rishon nidlak shumasa, or you ate tevel, untithed produce, or maiser rishon that you did not remove truma from, or maiser sheni behekdesh lo nifdu, or you ate maiser sheni hekdesh that were not redeemed. So we'll say in all of these cases also malchus. Good. The Gemara says, by the way, kama yochal min tevel ve'echayiv. When we speak about eating tevel, untithed produce, if you do that, you get malchus. How much tevel do you have to eat in order to be chayiv? Rabbi Shimon says, kol shu, any amount of tevel makes you chayiv. The chum say no kizayis. That's to be a kizayis of tevel. Rabbi Shimon, iatemodinli ba'ochal nemola kol shu shu chayiv. So Rabbi Shimon says, I don't understand. Don't you agree? We'll say, what's the halacha if you eat an ant? If you eat an ant, now we're going to see, by the way, amazingly enough, if you eat an ant, you are chayiv multiple prohibitions. We'll discuss this. And yet, we'll say an ant is a kol shu. Is tiny. So what do you see from here? That you could be chayiv even if you eat less than a kizayis. So Rabbi Shimon says to Chachamim, I don't understand. Why do you need to eat a kizayis? It's just like if you eat an ant, you're chayiv. So too, if you eat a kol shu of tevel, you should also be chayiv. To which the Gemara says, no, an ant is different. Why? It was going to be a great sugya, because an ant is a barrier. It's a complete unit of creation. That's what it is. An ant is that size. That's its shear because it's an ant. So it's different. So to a wheat kernel is also created as a wheat kernel. And therefore, if you eat a wheat kernel of tevel, you should be chayiv for that act of consumption. Okay. So we'll say, so now let's analyze. So we'll say, so remember again, essentially in our Mishnah, we had two categories really, right? We had chayiv krisos, right? Kares bearing prohibitions, and lavin, and teaching me that both are chayiv in malchus. Interestingly enough, what's glaringly absent from the Mishnah? Chayiv misos bezdin, right? Prohibitions that were capital crimes. I don't know. Reuven goes ahead and commits adultery, or Reuven goes ahead and kills someone. Right? So these are capital crimes. Yet, interestingly enough, they're not mentioned in the Mishnah, which makes it sound like only chayvi krisos get malchus, chayvi misos bezdin not. So Gemara says chayvi krisos katani, chayvi misos bezdin lo katani. Why not? Masnisin money. So who's the opinion? Does our Mishnah reflect? Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva. The Sanya. Listen to this. Echad chayvi krisos ve'echad chayvi misos bezdin. Amid, bless you. Amid days. Yeshno bichlal malchus arba'am divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion. There was Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that whether you go ahead and you do a chiyuv kares or a chiyuv mises bezdin, you always get malchus. Right? You'll get malchus for any of these prohibitions. This is what Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says chayve krisos. Listen to this. Yesh no bechlal malchus arba'im. Listen to this. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it's only kares for which you'll get malchus. Why is it kares for which you get malchus? This is fascinating. Listen to this. Shim asa tshuva bezdin shalmayla mochlin mehen. What's the chap with kares? Remember again, if a person does a kares bearing prohibition, what punishment do you get in Bezdin? What do you get in Bezdin? Nothing. Kares is between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But interestingly enough, what's the chap with kares? The beauty of kares, that came out wrong. Right? There's no beauty in kares, but the positives, there's got to be a bright side in everything. You have to be an eternal optimist. The bright side of kares is you could do tshuva and get out of it. You can do tshuva and be forgiven. So Rabbi Akiva says something very interesting. Rabbi Akiva holds, when a person is chayev misas bezdin, there are no malchus. Why? You're already getting punished. And by the way, how do you get out of that punishment? You can't. Once you're chayev misas bezdin, you can't. There's no like, I'm really sorry, I'll do better, community service, right? You can't. Once you're chayev misa, you're chayev misa. By chayev kares, Rabbi Akiva says, you could do tshuva, and you can do tshuva and be exempted from kares. So because Rabbi Akiva says, therefore, you will get malchus by chiyuv kares. Incredible. Chayve misos bezin eno bechlal malchus arbaim. Shim also tshuva in bezin shalmata mochlin mem. Rabbi Akiva says, by misas bezdin, whether you still have to do tshuva, but even if you do tshuva, you're not getting out of the death penalty. You're still going to be chayev misa. Rabbi Yitzchak says, chayve krisos bechlal hayu. The lama yatsa karis bacho. So Rabbi Yitzchak said, in reality, you're right. You're supposed to get malchus chayve krisos. But ultimately, again, interestingly enough, a lama yatsa karis bacho. So why does the Torah single out kares by one's sister? That if one engages in an act of incest with one's sister, that she's chayv kares. Ladona b'kares malchus. To teach us ultimately again that there's a chiyuv kares and not the chiyuv malchus. So we'll say Rabbi Yitzchak has a third opinion. Rabbi Yitzchak's opinion says, there's no malchus, neither for chayve misos bezdin, nor for chayve krisos. So therefore, we have a three-way machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel says there's malchus for both misas chayve misos bezdin and chiyuv kares. Rabbi Akiva says, well, let's go the opposite direction. Rabbi Yitzchak says there's no malchus, neither for chayve misos bezdin nor for chiyuv kares. And Rabbi Akiva is like the middle position. There's no malchus for chiyuv misas bezdin, but there will be a chiyuv kares there will be a chiyuv malchus for kares. And Rabbi Akiva espouses his logic. Why? Because by kares, it's possible that you're going to do tshuva and therefore will be exempted from all liability. Okay, so now let's analyze this. By time Rabbi Shmuel. So also, let's go through each of them. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Right? Rabbi Shmuel says you get malchus for everything. What's Rabbi Shmuel's logic? Tichsev im lo sishmar lasos es kol divrei Torah zos. So the pasuk says, if you will not keep the words of the Torah, ksiv v'hifla Hashem es makoscha. Hashem will amplify your makoscha, your makoscha, your punishments. So the Gemara says, hafla zu ini yodea mahi. I don't know what hafla means. What does it mean? What does that mean? Kishu omer ve'pilo hashofet v'yikal lefonav. When the pasuk says that the shofet, right, the shofet will administer malchus. Havi omer hafla zu malkusi. So what do you see from here? You see from here that when it says v'hifla shemes makoscha, that refers to malchus. Uksiv im lo sishmar lasos es kol. And you see from here that where do you get malchus? You get malchus for everything. Misas bezdin chiyuv kares, everything. The Gemara says, well, if it's everything, ihachi chayve aseinami. They both say if that's the case, then you should get malchus. Even for a chiyuv asei. Both say this is, by the way, this is so incredible that we're doing this Gemara today. We'll say for many of us, today is going to be the first day in over a week that we're going to have the opportunity to fulfill an asay, which asay? Of tefillin. You know that they say that Rabbi Yitzchak Berdishav Zechusei Yagin Aleinu could not sleep the night after Achron Shel Pesach. Why? He was so excited just for the Zman of Misha Yakir that he could put on his tefillin. And he didn't put on his tefillin for a week. So he could not wait to put on tefillin until the morning after Yom Tov. He couldn't sleep. We'll say, how we should always zocha to sleepless nights because we're eager to perform a mitzvah. And how incredible is to have this Gemara over here? If that's the case, that you should get malchus for everything, then it reminds you should even get malchus for non-performance of an assay, right? That should work as well. To which the Gemara says, no. Imlo sishmar. Imlo sishmar. The pasuk is phrases as a los assay. If you don't do something, right? If you don't, a prohibition. Okay, the Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Lai, Dam Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Lai, Chomakum Shnemar Yishamer Pen Vaal Eina Elalos Assay. Wherever the Torah uses lashon of Yishamer Pen Vaal, there is a prohibition. I.e. Hachi Lav Shein B'Maisa Nami. If that's the case in Rabbi Shmuel, you should also get Malchus for Lav Shein B'Maisa. But Lav Shein B'Maisa is a lav that doesn't even have an act, doesn't even have an action associated with it. To which the Gemara says Lasos Ksiv. No, it doesn't work because the pasuk says Lasos. You only get Malchus for a prohibition that involves a dynamic activity. I lav shenitak naaseh lami. You should get Malchus for a lav shenitak laaseh. Now we'll say, what's a lav shenitak laaseh? Is a lav that is remedied by the performance of a positive commandment. Paradigmatic example of that: theft. Torah says you can't steal. What happens if you steal? You have to return the stolen item. So you should get Malchus even for a lav shenita class A. Shabbos say, get ready for this line because it's going to be very important. Dumya, the lav de chasima. Shabbos say, the paradigmatic lav for which one will get Malchus for is the lav of chasima, which is the lav of muzzling your animal. You're not like that. Torah says, lo sachsom shar bedisho. You cannot muzzle your ox when it threshes. Right? You have to let the animal eat while it threshes. So we'll say, why is this the paradigmatic example? So Rashi points out, very interestingly enough, that we're going to get more into this, but the Torah talks about malchus, right? Lashes. Right after the section of lashes, right after that is the lav of chasima, of not muzzling your animal. The Gemara understands that juxtaposition to teach me that the paradigmatic avera, that for which you're chayiv malchus, is chasima. Because chasima has it all, right? Muzzling really has it all. It's one-stop shopping, right? Why? Number one, it's a prohibition. Number two, it's an action, right? It's active. Number three, it can't be remedied, right? You can't undo it. And therefore, again, this becomes like the poster child, ultimately, again, for a lav. Fine. So the Gemara says, Hashta da'asis la'achi, kulu nami dumiyat lav dechasima. All right, now that we have that, by the way, that answers a lot of our previous questions of this. So therefore, I will say, this is the position of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, you get malchus for chayve misos based in chiyav misa, and you get malchus ultimately again for chiyav kares. You get malchus for everything. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Next, Rabbi Akiva. What's Rabbi Akiva's? What's the position of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva holds you do not get malchus for chiyav misa, but you will get malchus for chiyav kares. What's his logic? Rabbi Akiva, my timer, very simple. Kedei rishaso. The pasuk says you shall punish a person in accordance with his wickedness. Singular. Can't give one person two punishments for the same crime. So therefore, if you're going to execute the guy anyway, you're going to execute him, then halacha l'maisa, you can't flog him and execute him. That's not right. On the other hand, I will say now it makes sense. By the way, what about kares? So remember again, what did Rabbi Akiva say? Now we answer the rest of Rabbi Akiva's statement. Why did Rabbi Akiva say you get malchus by kares? If you can't punish a person twice for the same crime, then why can you get malchus for a kares bearing prohibition? Why? Because you can do tshuva. Because since I can do tshuva and remove kares, therefore I'm going to get malchus. Rabbi Shmuel. Now what does Rabbi Shmuel do with kedei rishaso? Hani mili misa umamon or malchus umamon. Rabbi Shmuel said that means you can't give a person misa and a monetary penalty, or malchus and a monetary penalty. Aval misa malchus, or say misa malchus, misa arichtehi. This is fascinating. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't view lashes and a death penalty as two punishments. Rather, what does he view it as? One protracted death penalty. Interesting. Rabbi Akiva, ihachi chayve krisos nami. But according to Rabbi Akiva, I don't understand. So we'll say, let's say Reuven ate chametz on Pesach. The penalty for chametz on Pesach is kares. So now, how can we give him malchus also? Isn't that punishing him twice for the same penalty? So my amrit shim also tshuva. So Rabbi Akiva said, oh, but it's not a double penalty. Why? Because if he does tshuva, he could go ahead and remove the kares penalty. That's very nice. But what? Hashta mihas lo avdi. Right now, he hasn't done tshuva. Shava said, by the way, What a profound statement. Right? Rabbi Akiva says it's not really a double penalty. Why? Because since he can do tshuva and remove kares, but he hasn't done tshuva. Which means that right now, Ruvain, after he ate chametz on Pesach, has two prohibitions hanging over his head. What are the two prohibitions? Kares, and are not two prohibitions, but two punishments, kares and malchus. Now, let's say it's just incredible. This phrase feels like a punch to the gut. And we'll say, all of us have the opportunity to do tshuva. We each have the opportunity to become bali tshuva. What's the only problem? Hashta mihas lahavdi. I'm not doing it. The opportunity for tshuva, literally, again, is right in front of me every moment and every single day. Only one little technicality: hashta mihas lohavdi. I have not yet done tshuva. Overwhelming. I'm Rabbi Aval. The Peirush strips the Torah, so therefore, again, we're trying to figure out Rabbi Akiva, right? Because Rabbi Akiva seems to be inherently contradictory. On one hand, Rabbi Akiva will say that if somebody is chayiv misas bezdin, you can't give them malchus also. Why? Kedei rishaso. You can only get one punishment per crime. So therefore, you can't give a guy both misa and malchus. So again, if Reuven ate chametz on Pesach, he's chayiv kares. How can you give him malchus also? So Rabbi Akiva says, because he could do tshuva, and if he does tshuva, he removes kares. That's very nice, but he didn't do tshuva yet. He didn't do tshuva. If he didn't do tshuva, we still have a problem of giving him two punishments for one kind. I will say, leave you on a cliffhanger. We're stopping here. Resolution of Rabbi Akiva, Miras Hashem tomorrow. Such a schos to begin again this new tekufa together. Shkayach, everyone. All right, have a great day, everyone. Shkayach.